So I just finished reading an article about Andrew Bolt, who was taken to court by a lady who claimed that she was Aboriginal. However, it turned out she wasn't. She said she was from Carnarvon over in Queensland and that she was Aboriginal descent, and she was offended that Andrew Bolt called her a white Aboriginal. Now, some of her family said that they weren't Aboriginal, but she claimed that she was. So anyway, she's passed on now. However, it's come to light that she isn't. And no one wanted to touch Andrew Bolt. It's a touchy subject, and I can see why it's a touchy subject because of stolen generation and so forth. However, when you got people ticking the box and making claims that they are Aboriginal, this is exactly what happens. This is the result of it. And I see this all the time. I've seen it growing up. I see it today as an adult. People ticking boxes. And there's two stories to why people tick boxes. One, we don't get free housing, but what we do get is some assistance in education, health, and getting a job, because we have to fill a quota. But what happens when someone who's not true Aboriginal and hasn't grown up with the same opportunities, but that opportunity is given to someone who's not of Aboriginal descent but has ticked the box, they're taking away the opportunity that actually belongs to an Aboriginal person. A child that needs to go to school, boarding school, get an education, a young adult going to university, or an adult going into a trade, the mining sector or corporate sector. So you're taking away a livelihood, a spot for that person. But here's the double-edged sword to this. So it turns out by ticking the box, having no full documentation that you are of Aboriginal descent, also leads to more funding for those organisations and corporations. See how it's a vicious cycle? It's an abusive cycle. So the more people that tick the box, the more funding these organisations get. That's the gist of it. So I don't like the fact that people can claim that they are Aboriginal, but have absolutely nothing to back it up.
I've learned something extraordinary. As I say, to me it now seems I've been stitched up. A judge fed a fake story that led him to impose a very damaging censorship. 13 years ago, a socialist activist called Pat Eatock sat in a courtroom and told Justice Morty Bromberg what new evidence tells me was a tall tale, a key part of the evidence that he used to actually ban two of my Herald Sun articles from being republished in a shocking attack on our free speech. Eatock told Bromberg I had intimidated and humiliated and insulted her by writing that she was a white Aborigine who'd chosen to call herself Aboriginal when she plainly had other choices. Now, Eatock's barrister, former Judge Ron Merkel, then read out her statement. This is, according to Eatock, I am an Aboriginal person with Aboriginal ancestry. My grandmother, Lucy Eatock, was born in Carnarvon Gorge in central Queensland in 1874. This is an Aboriginal birthing place. She was of the Kiri people. My grandmother's mother was an Aboriginal woman called Kitty. My grandmother's husband, my grandfather, was an Aboriginal man, Bill Eatock. If only I had known then what I know now about every one of those statements. Having gone through the evidence he himself no doubt believed, this barrister of Pat Eatock, in this case Merkel, smeared me as a Nazi-like person for doubting the genuineness of people like Eatock, who's the lead plaintiff in this action on behalf of 9 fair-skinned Aboriginals that I'd written about. Now, this barrister claimed that my kind of thinking actually led to the Nuremberg race laws, the Nazi ones, and even hinted that I could inspire genocide, adding the Holocaust in the 1940s started with words and finished with violence. It was a disgusting smear, but Eatock won. Justice Bromberg banned my 2 articles, ruling I had racially discriminated against Eatock for saying, among other things, she had had a choice how to identify himself. No, she didn't, he insisted. Nor had the others in the case. They were born Aboriginal. Born Aboriginal. Yet Eatock herself had talked about not identifying as Aboriginal until after her teenage years.
And John Laws was on the radio, and he said something that was really, really racist. And she picked it up and added to it. And I said, hey, you can't say that. I'm Aboriginal, you know. And this was the first time I'd made a statement about, you know, I'm Aboriginal, you know. Mm-hmm. And up until that point in time, you know, it had never, it was a part of me, but it was down. Yeah.
But this judgment against me was momentous, the whole proceedings, because since then very few journalists, almost none at all, seeing what has happened to me, have dared to question the white Aborigines now increasingly found in politics and universities, even ones with not one known Aboriginal ancestor, according to a review of their genealogical records, like Professor Bruce Pascoe, like Professor Kerry Doyle, like South Australian Attorney General Kaya Ma and many others I've since named. And it's no wonder journalists don't dare go where I went, because who wants to risk being damned as a Nazi and a racist? Well, certainly not the barrister hired by my newspaper at the time. I've often blamed myself for not pushing him even harder to challenge Eatock's story, because his cross-examination of her ended where it should have started. Let me read it out to you. My barrister asks Eatock, some of your relatives do not identify themselves as Aboriginal, as you do. Eatock, that's right. My barrister, they've made different decisions about their Aboriginal identity. And Eatock says, that's right. And my barrister then says, nothing further, and sits down. But now I've learned why it's no surprise that most of Eatock's relatives do disagree with her, and did. Last month I did what I didn't realise was possible 13 years ago. You can blame me. I asked professional genealogists of Roger Carter's brilliant darkemuexposed.org website to check Eatock's family tree. The results should embarrass everyone who used Eatock's story to censor the debate on people choosing to identify as Aboriginal. Now, I should first add a disclaimer here. Maybe those genealogists made mistakes, although I've got to say Carter's website has now uncovered many people, including Bruce Pascoe, who wrongly claimed to be Aboriginal, has not been faulted once. And, you know, maybe Eatock herself honestly believed some old family gossip that she perhaps then spun into proof that she was Aboriginal, may have genuinely believed, I don't know. But here is what those genealogists found, which you can now read in massive detail over the next 3 days on the darkemuexposed.org website. Every one of those Eatock claims that I've quoted earlier on are false according to the available records. Now, of course, Eatock is now dead, can't respond, but not one of her ancestors was Aboriginal. Her grandmother Lucy wasn't born in an Aboriginal birthing place in Carnarvon Gorge, but at her parents' home in Springsure, 180 kilometres away, according to her birth certificate. That certificate also shows that Lucy's mother wasn't an Aboriginal woman called Kitty, but a Scottish woman called Jane, who was attended at the birth by a doctor and a midwife. Lucy also didn't look Aboriginal. She looked like a carbon copy of a Scottish mum. Nor are there any records of this Kiri tribe she apparently belonged to. None. Nor any record of an Aboriginal girl called Kitty, who seems to be an invention inspired by a Tongan girl called Lizzie or Takrao, who was taken in by Lucy's parents for a few years after Lucy's birth. Nor was Eatock's grandfather Bill an Aborigine. Eatock made a false conclusion simply from the colour of his skin. In fact, the genealogist found a missing birth certificate showing that Bill's father was Richard Rose, who came from St Vincent and the Grenadines in the West Indies, and had a brief affair here with a married white woman. Now, this Richard Rose turned out to be the son of a British slave owner and an African. He inherited money when his father died and sailed to Australia to become Eatock's Aboriginal ancestor, Pat Eatock's father. When I say Aboriginal, try African American or West Indian American, black. So the conclusion is Etox genealogy shows she should never have been allowed to bring her case against me. If these genealogists are correct, she had no legal standing in the case since she wasn't Aboriginal. And I was right, more right than I knew then, to say she had just chosen to be Aboriginal.